How does the tech that runs our world really work? We break it down to its fundamental truths. This is First Principles.
You come home after a long day. You pull your electric car into the garage, the tires whispering on the concrete. You reach for the charging cable, a thick, reassuring cord. You plug it into the port on the car's side. There's a quiet, satisfying click. A small light on the dashboard blinks to life, and that's it. No roar of an engine, no smell of gasoline. Just silent, effortless, invisible power flowing from the wall into the massive battery beneath your feet. Tomorrow morning it will be full, ready to take you a few hundred miles. It's a moment of mundane magic. We do this sort of thing all day long. We plug in our phones, our laptops, our coffee makers. We flip a switch, and a dark room is flooded with light. We press a button, and a machine starts to hum. We almost never think about it. The power is just there. It's a foundational assumption of modern life, as basic and reliable as gravity. But have you ever stopped to wonder how that actually works? Not just the wiring in your house, but the entire continent-spanning system that delivers that precise little stream of electrons to your car at the exact moment you demand it. What if I told you that the electricity filling your car battery wasn't made this morning or last night, but was generated at the very instant you plugged it in, perhaps hundreds of miles away, at a wind turbine spinning in the dark or a solar panel basking in the afternoon sun? What if I told you that this simple act, plugging in your car, is the final step in the most complex and delicate balancing act in human history? A performance that has to be perfect every second of every day, or the whole system collapses. This is the story of the electrical grid, and more importantly, it's the story of the quiet, profound, and desperately needed revolution that is happening to it right now. Today, on First Principles, we are opening the black box of the smart grid. The power grid is, without exaggeration, the largest and most complex machine humanity has ever built. It's a sprawling, interconnected web of power plants, transformers, substations, and millions upon millions of miles of wire. It's the circulatory system of our civilization, pumping the lifeblood of energy to every factory, every hospital, every home. And for most of its history, it has been an invisible miracle. We only ever notice it when it breaks. A flicker of the lights during a storm, a neighborhood blackout on a hot summer day. These are the rare moments when the veil is lifted and we're reminded of the intricate system we depend on. For most of our lives, the experience of using electricity has been defined by its sheer, brute force reliability. You demand power, and the grid supplies it. The relationship is simple, one-directional. You are a consumer. You flip the switch, you pay the bill. The complexity, the generation, the physics, all of it is hidden away, managed by armies of engineers in anonymous-looking control rooms. The grid feels less like a dynamic network and more like a utility, as static and dependable as the water pipes running under your street. And this feeling of effortless availability is, in itself, a monumental achievement. It's the culmination of over a century of incredible engineering. It's what allows a surgeon's light to stay on in the middle of a complex operation, what keeps our data centers humming and our global economy running. The sheer scale of it is almost impossible to comprehend. In North America alone, the grid consists of thousands of generating plants connected by enough high-voltage transmission lines to wrap around the Earth more than a dozen times, all of it working in perfect synchrony. But that very success, that seamless invisibility, has made us blind to a deep and growing problem. This 20th century marvel, This masterpiece of centralized industrial engineering is being pushed to its breaking point by the demands of the 21st century. The magic is starting to fray at the edges. To understand why, we have to go back. We have to understand the world the grid was born into, and the fundamental problem it was designed to solve. Because the story of the grid isn't just about technology, it's about a single, inescapable law of physics that governs everything. Before the grid, the world ran on a different clock. Life was dictated by the sun. When it set, most activity ceased. Cities were lit by the flickering, hazy glow of gas lamps. Industry was powered by steam engines, belching smoke and tethered to their fuel sources, be it coal or wood. Power was local, and it was mechanical. If you wanted to run a machine, you needed an engine right there next to it. The idea of sending power, invisibly, over miles of wire, was the stuff of fantasy. When pioneers like Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla began to harness electricity, they weren't just inventing a new kind of light. They were wrestling with a new kind of product. Electricity is unlike anything else we manufacture and sell. You can't put it in a box and store it on a shelf. You can't stockpile it in a warehouse for a busy season. For all practical purposes, at the scale of a national grid, electricity has to be consumed at the exact microsecond it is produced. Let that sink in for a moment. Every time you turn on a light, somewhere on the grid, a generator has to spin just a little bit harder to produce those exact watts of power right then. The amount of electricity being generated across the entire continent must, at all times, perfectly equal the total amount of electricity being consumed. Not approximately, perfectly. If generation exceeds consumption by even a small fraction, the frequency of the grid rises, and sensitive equipment can be damaged. If consumption exceeds generation, the frequency drops, and the system can collapse, leading to a cascading blackout. This is the great balancing act. It is the single, foundational challenge of running a power grid. The engineers of the 20th century came up with a brilliant solution. It was elegant, robust, and hierarchical. They built a one-way street. At one end, you have a small number of very large, centralized power plants: coal, natural gas, hydroelectric, nuclear. These are the producers. They are big, predictable, and controllable. If you need more power, you tell the engineers at the coal plant to burn more coal, spinning the turbines faster. If you need less, you ramp them down. From these giant plants, the electricity flows downhill through a network of transmission and distribution lines. Its voltage steps down along the way until it finally reaches its destination. The consumers, your home, my home, the local factory. In this model, information also flows one way. The grid operators predict demand based on historical data. The time of day, the weather, whether there's a major sporting event on TV. They then issue commands to the power plants to adjust supply accordingly. We, the consumers, are just a passive load at the end of the line. We flip our switches, and the system, a slow-moving giant, adjusts. This model worked astonishingly well for 100 years. It electrified the world and powered the modern age. But it has a fatal flaw. It was designed for a world of predictable supply and predictable demand. And that is a world we no longer live in. Two revolutions are happening simultaneously, and they are breaking the one-way street. The first is on the supply side. The rise of renewable energy. Wind turbines and solar panels are essential for our future, but from a grid operator's perspective, they are a nightmare. They are intermittent. You can't command the sun to shine or the wind to blow. A cloud passes over a massive solar farm, and thousands of megawatts of generation can vanish from the grid in seconds. A gust of wind sweeps across a plain of turbines, and a surge of power appears. This variability, this unpredictability, wreaks havoc on a system built for controllable, steady power plants. And these new sources aren't centralized. They're distributed. Millions of solar panels are appearing on suburban rooftops. This means power is no longer just flowing downhill from a few big plants. It's sometimes flowing uphill, from a house back onto the local grid. The one-way street is becoming a chaotic multi-lane roundabout. The second revolution is on the demand side. The biggest example is the electric vehicle. The old grid was designed around predictable daily curves. People wake up, turn on their lights and coffee makers, go to work, come home, make dinner, watch TV, and go to bed. The pattern is well understood. But now, imagine a neighborhood where everyone arrives home between 5 and 6 p.m. and plugs in their car. This creates a massive, unprecedented spike in demand. A demand cliff that the local infrastructure was never built to handle. Fuses blow, transformers overload. The old slow-moving giant can't react fast enough. So this is the problem. The core challenge. We have a 20th century grid, a one-way street, built for a world of predictable, centralized power. And we are trying to run it in a 21st century world of unpredictable, decentralized power and spiky new demands. The great balancing act is becoming nearly impossible to perform. Just building more power plants and bigger wires isn't the answer. That's like trying to solve traffic congestion by only adding more lanes. It's expensive, inefficient, and ultimately, it doesn't fix the underlying problem. We don't just need a bigger grid, we need a smarter one. So how do you solve it? How do you manage a system where supply can vanish in a heartbeat and demand can spike without warning, all while maintaining that perfect second-by-second balance? This is the question that leads us to the smart grid. And the answer, the first principle, isn't about building better turbines or bigger wires. It's about information. The fundamental flaw of the old grid wasn't just that it was a one-way street for electricity. It was a one-way street for communication. Grid operators were flying half-blind. They had a good view of the big power plants and major transmission lines. But the closer you got to the customer, the fuzzier the picture became. They knew the total demand in a city, but they didn't know what was happening on a specific street or in a specific house until long after the fact. It was like trying to conduct a symphony orchestra while only being able to hear the brass section. The first principle of the smart grid is to transform this one-way monologue into a two-way conversation. It's about embedding the grid with a nervous system, sensors, communications, and data analytics that allows it to feel, to monitor, and to respond to what's happening everywhere on the network, in real time. Let's go back to our analogy. The old grid was like a lecture. You have one professor, the power plant, broadcasting information to a passive audience of students. The consumers. The professor talks, the students listen. The flow is one way. A smart grid is like the internet. It's a decentralized network where every node, every connection point can both send and receive information. It's a dynamic, interactive conversation. The most visible piece of this new conversation is probably the smart meter on the side of your house. For decades, our electric meters were simple, mechanical devices. Little spinning wheels behind a glass dome. Someone from the utility had to physically come to your house once a month and read the dials to figure out how much electricity you used. It was a dumb device, capable of only one thing: counting total consumption over a long period. A smart meter is a different beast entirely. It's a sophisticated digital sensor and a two-way communication hub. Instead of a monthly reading, a smart meter can report your energy usage to the utility every hour, or even every 15 minutes. This is a seismic shift. For the first time, grid operators have a high-resolution, near-real-time picture of what is happening at the very edge of their network. They don't just see the total load of a city. They can see the ebb and flow of demand in every neighborhood, on every street. They can see the impact of that cloud passing over the solar panels. They can see the demand spike when everyone gets home and plugs in their cars. The fog of war is lifting. But it's not just about the meters on our homes. The smart grid involves embedding sensors throughout the entire network. Devices called phasor measurement units, or PMUs, are installed on transmission lines and at substations. Think of them as taking the grid's pulse. They measure the voltage, current, and frequency of the electrical wave with incredible precision, many times per second. This data, time-stamped with GPS, gives operators a system-wide view of the grid's health and stability. Before, a problem like a failing transformer might not be noticed until it caused a blackout. With PMUs, operators can see the subtle fluctuations, the early warning signs of stress on the system, and can reroute power or take preventative action before a small problem cascades into a massive failure. This torrent of new data is the first step. The grid now has a nervous system. It can feel what's happening, but that information is useless without a brain to process it and the limbs to act on it. The second principle of the smart grid is automated control. This is where the real intelligence comes in. The smart grid uses advanced software and automated switches to react to the data it's collecting, often without human intervention. Imagine a tree branch falls on a power line. In the old grid, this would cause a surge, trip a breaker at a substation, and an entire neighborhood would go dark. An outage would be reported, and eventually, a crew would be dispatched to drive around looking for the problem. In a smart grid, sensors would instantly detect the location of the fault. Automated switches, like traffic cops on the grid, would immediately reroute power around the damaged section, isolating the problem. For many people, the lights might only flicker for a second before the power is restored from a different direction. For the few houses on the directly affected line, the utility knows exactly where the problem is and can dispatch a crew to the precise location immediately. This is what engineers call self-healing. The grid becomes more like a biological organism, able to automatically detect injury and work around it to maintain the health of the whole. This is a profound shift from the brittle top-down structure of the old system. It's about building resilience from the ground up. So we have two-way information flow and automated control. The grid can now see and react. This allows it to manage the chaos of renewables and new demands far more effectively. It can anticipate a drop in solar output and smoothly ramp up another power source to compensate. It can monitor the load on a local transformer and manage the charging of electric vehicles to prevent an overload. But so far, we've still been talking about the grid reacting to us. We're still describing a smarter version of the old one-way relationship. The utility sees what we're doing and adjusts the supply to match. This is where we come to the most radical, most transformative idea of the smart grid. The real aha moment. It's not just about making the grid smarter at managing supply. It's about making the grid capable of actively shaping and managing demand. This is the unseen giant. It's a concept called demand response, and it turns the entire logic of the last 100 years on its head. The old grid had only one tool to deal with rising demand: increase supply. On a hot summer afternoon, as millions of air conditioners kick on, the grid operators would have to fire up what are called peaker plants. These are often older, less efficient, and more polluting power plants typically running on natural gas or diesel that sit idle most of the year, waiting to be called upon for just a few hours to meet that peak demand. They are incredibly expensive to run and are a major source of carbon emissions. The entire system has to be overbuilt, with enough generation capacity to meet the highest possible peak, even if that peak only occurs for a few hours a year. It's wildly inefficient. The smart grid offers a second tool, a much more elegant and powerful one. What if, instead of frantically trying to increase supply to meet the peak, you could simply reduce the peak itself? What if you could ask demand to be a little more flexible? This is where the two-way conversation becomes a true partnership. Through your smart meter and your connected devices, the grid can communicate with your home. It can send signals, not commands, indicating the state of the grid. For instance, it can send a price signal. At 3 p.m. on that sweltering August day, when electricity is most expensive to produce and the grid is most strained, the price could go up. At 3 a.m., when demand is low and wind turbines are spinning unused, the price could drop to nearly zero. Suddenly, you and your devices have a reason to care about when you use electricity, not just how much. Your smart dishwasher could be programmed to automatically run in the middle of the night when power is cheapest and cleanest. Your electric water heater could be set to heat water during off-peak hours, and then store it for when you need it. These are small shifts, but multiplied across millions of homes, they begin to smooth out the sharp peaks and deep valleys of demand, making the whole system vastly more efficient. But it gets much more profound than that. The grid won't just be talking to your appliances, it will be talking to your car. Let's go back to you plugging in your EV. In the old model, this is a problem. A huge, dumb load hitting the grid at the worst possible time. In the smart grid model, your car becomes a solution. Your car is, fundamentally, a very large battery on wheels. A typical EV battery can store enough energy to power the average American home for a day or two. And for 22 hours out of every 24, that battery is just sitting there, parked. What if your car wasn't just a load? What if it could also be a source? This is the idea of vehicle-to-grid, or V2G. Imagine this scenario. You get home at 6 p.m. and plug in your car, telling it you need a full charge by 7 a.m. the next morning. The grid is currently at peak demand. Electricity is expensive and dirty. So your smart charger doesn't start charging right away. It waits. Then, around 7 p.m., as demand starts to spike even higher, the utility sends a signal. Instead of drawing power, your car's charger reverses flow. It begins selling a small amount of electricity from your car's battery back to the grid. It might only be a few kilowatts, but multiplied by thousands of other EVs in your city doing the same thing, it creates a massive distributed virtual power plant. Together, these cars help the grid get through that peak demand without having to fire up a dirty peaker plant. Later that night, around 2 a.m., demand has plummeted. Wind power is abundant and cheap. The charger kicks back on and begins to replenish your car's battery, ensuring it's full by morning as requested. And because you sold expensive electricity back to the grid and bought cheap electricity late at night, the utility doesn't just thank you, it pays you. You've earned money simply by letting your parked car help balance the grid. This isn't science fiction. It's being tested and deployed in pilot programs around the world right now. It completely reframes our relationship with energy. Your car is no longer just a mode of transportation. It's an active, revenue-generating asset for grid stability. Your home, with its smart thermostat water heater and solar panels, is no longer just a point of consumption. It's a dynamic, responsive node in a massive energy network. This is the common misconception that the smart grid corrects. Many people hear smart grid and think it's just about efficiency or about giving utilities more control. Some hear smart meter and worry it's just a more invasive way to bill them. But the reality is so much more radical. The core principle isn't about top-down control. It's about decentralization. It's about transforming millions of passive consumers into active prosumers, participants who both produce and consume energy, and whose devices can intelligently manage their demand to help the whole system function better. It's not a smarter pipe. It's an internet of energy. We started this journey with a simple, magical act, plugging in a car and watching it silently fill with power. We saw it as the end point of a one-way street, a system that has served us well, but is now cracking under the strain of a new energy world. We then opened the box. We saw that the smart in smart grid comes from its first principles, embedding a two-way nervous system of information that allows the grid to see and react, and enabling a two-way flow of energy that allows for automated, self-healing control. But the deepest truth we uncovered is that this new intelligence isn't just for the grid operators. It's for all of us. The smart grid's ultimate purpose is to orchestrate a vast, decentralized collaboration. It allows millions of devices, our cars, our air conditioners, our solar panels, to work together, automatically and invisibly. To solve the great balancing act, it takes the largest machine on Earth and transforms it from a rigid mechanical hierarchy into an adaptive, distributed, and intelligent network. The 20th century grid was built on a principle of centralized command and control, bringing power from a few to the many. The 21st century smart grid is being built on a far more profound and democratic idea, that the stability and resilience of the entire system can be found in the collective intelligence and flexibility of its millions of individual parts. The largest machine on Earth is learning to think.
You've been listening to First Principles. Until next time, stay curious.